Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Gale. I lead the aviation environmental team at EXP, an architecture engineering firm. Currently the project manager for the Port of Seattle's sustainable aviation fuel study, working with airports on renewable energy development, disaster resilience of their infrastructure, really the net zero umbrella that we like to call it. Happy to be here today. For those of you walking out, I will assume that you're going up to your room to take a nap. But with that being said, I'd like to introduce our panel that we have on the stage, starting with April Murphy with Alaska Airlines. And April, we'll have you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm April Murphy, and I'm the portfolio manager for the Seattle Hub developments. So in my role, I'm overseeing all of the major construction projects that Alaska does at the airport, but I'm also partnering with the Port of Seattle on all of the projects that they do, either for Alaska or in our areas of operation. So lucky enough for me, I've enjoyed in my time executing the North Satellite redevelopment program, where we almost doubled the size of the NSAT terminal and added 8 new gates. I also got to do the flagship lounge in N, so if any of you have ever flown out from Seattle and enjoyed a Bloody Mary and a pancake from our pancake printing machine, you're welcome. And then, of course, my favourite project, so partnering with Propeller Airports to create Payne Field, a beautiful new commercial airport just to service our North Sound guests. And for my sins now, partnering with the Port of Seattle on the $650 million lobby redevelopment at SeaTac.
Thanks, April. And to April's left, we have George Seaman with the Port of Portland.
And I'm not sure, April, your lobby redevelopment is worse than ours right now, so it's okay. So my name's George Seaman. I'm a project manager at the Port of Portland. The Port of Portland manages PDX Airport, a couple other airports in the Portland region, 3 marine terminals, and a number of industrial parks. I've been with the port about 18 years now, and right now I'm managing for the last 8 years our $2 billion redevelopment of the airport, which is the core redevelopment of the ticket lobby and really expanding it and growing it to support the aviation industry in the future.
Thanks, George. And last but not least, we have Jay Olson with Arup.
Hi, everyone. Jay Olson. I lead the aviation business for the Western U.S. for Arup. I've been in this industry for 30 years and with Arup for 16 here in Seattle. And in fact, in a couple weeks, we're going to be celebrating our 20th year here in Seattle. We've grown to about 75 folks. I have an electrical engineering background. And I was talking to someone the other day. I've spent my entire career trying to get people to want to talk about electrical engineering. And now that we're all talking electrification, this is my day. So that's been across the spectrum of project types, but always the conversation is around, hey, how do I adapt to this new change? How do I grow my facility? How do we become more resilient, usually after something bad has happened? And so my job right now is, yes, thinking about those things on the electrical side, but as well as across all of the engineering services that Arup provides, whether that's structural or facade or tunneling or aviation planning. They're all relevant in some way, and we bring those services to bear as needed.
And I love to talk all things sustainability and resilience, but to start off, April, I'll direct the first question at you. Airports in the Pacific Northwest have either reached or will reach pre-pandemic air travel demand by 2024 with continued growth forecasted. How are airports preparing to meet this continued passenger growth, and what is your role?
Well, for Alaska, we're already at pre-pandemic levels of travel. So what I'm doing while I'm systematically trashing our entire Seattle lobby is I need to make sure that I can continue to support that volume of guests and also that volume of bags that are coming through. We've seen a real change from pre-pandemic, which was mainly focused on our business traveler, heading to the airport with their laptop bag, going straight through security. But now we're seeing a massive increase in leisure travel. So that's really a handful of guests in the lobby, maybe only traveling once a year, so it's a bit new and scary every time they hit the lobby. And we're having to make sure that we have simple processes and also enough capacity in our lobby area during construction that we can support those guests. We're also looking at easing the traveller experience by rolling out their ability to self-service even before they get to the airport. Our goal is to have our guests only in our lobby for 5 minutes. We really want them to be able to get through security and head to that dining options or our lounges. And so what we're doing is rolling out supportive technologies, such as our bag tag stations. This has reduced the transaction time from 90 seconds down to around 45 seconds. If you haven't used them yet, you're simply going to walk up to a bag tag station with your boarding pass on your phone. It scans and immediately processes your bag tags. This is a significant improvement for how we've been supporting our guests to date.
Thank you. So from a PDX perspective, and I'll mention a project is called T-Core, Terminal Core Redevelopment Project. When we kicked this off about 8 years ago, we completed a terminal area master plan that worked its way through what we had to do in the project, and it said the first thing you have to do is look at your seismic. The 95-page report had looked at it. As we started the project, this was at this point about a $350 million plan. We realized the existing building had incredible constraints from the old seismic structural nature of the building. Because it's stitched together from the original 1956 building all the way up to the 2002 edition for the terminal expansion area south. And so all these things really drove us that we were at capacity for passengers and we couldn't grow within our footprint. So that drove the Terminal Core project, which was really driven by a seismic enhancement and improvement of the building, the improvement of the passenger experience by redoing the ticket lobby, and there's a lot of work we're doing with Alaska on that to coordinate the activities we're doing, as well as be able to improve our seismic resiliency, our sustainability, and also there was about $200 million worth of aging infrastructure that we knew we'd have to replace from mechanical, electrical systems. So we're able to roll all of that into one big project. And that's really our big challenge now. And that, as I think the question was, I'm the project manager for the project, and I've got a number of port PMs that kind of work under me and support me in getting through this endeavor.
Your question was about how do airports plan for that growth, and obviously at Seattle and Portland, you've heard about that. But I think if you look at any of the other airports in the Pacific Northwest, whether that's Boise or Bellingham or Spokane or Eugene, they're all planning expansion to their gate capacity for good reason. And my role is really to partner with those airports and do what George just said, which is sort of take that bigger picture to the master plan and say, okay, if we're going to tear this down anyways, or if we're going to upgrade this piece, how do we get double duty out of those dollars, or at least not tear up the same place twice? How do we, does it make sense right now, because we're on the verge of seeing massive electric vehicle use by rental car companies, to take a look at an electrical master plan for the campus to just know where we're going rather than trying to guess what the next step is and which project should go first. So that's really our role, is to pump the brakes just a little bit, make sure we've thought about the big picture before we make any moves forward.
So talking about, George, you mentioned a constrained airport environment, and Jay, you're speaking to opportunities and challenges within aging infrastructure. Curious on the Alaska Airlines front, where you see opportunities regarding infrastructure within the constrained environment with the Port of Seattle, or perhaps at Payne Field as well, and how you navigate these opportunities, we'll call them.
Well, if you've been to Seattle, you know that it's already one of the most constrained airports in North America. And we execute massive projects there. So we've done North Satellite, we've done the ticketing lobby redevelopment now, significant airfield paving, and in the future, we've got the South Satellite redevelopment. As an airline, what we need to do is really be flexible in how we operate in that environment. We need to maintain our full schedule and full loads, no matter what it is that's happening in the airport. So what we do is we work with the airport to do things like off-gate busing or ground loading. We run buses in replacement of trains when there's doing train infrastructure improvements. We also do things like, what could it be? Maximising gates. So looking at the construction phasing of the different projects and finding a way that we can maintain the maximum number of gates at all time. And even working with the different construction teams on rephasing, looking for opportunities where we can minimise the traveller disruption by resequencing small areas or big areas of the construction activities. During COVID, our North Satellite project took huge advantage of the ridiculously low passenger volumes to expedite construction work that would have actually taken an extra year of work for the North Satellite construction. So it's really about having the discussions, thinking on our feet and leaning into the challenges that are coming our way and just figuring out a way that we can partner and keep the airlines running and keep the projects going.
From a PDX perspective, we're like Seattle. If you've been there, extremely constrained. A lot of the other airports around the country that are building new terminal buildings or modifying have the footprint to enable themselves to build a new terminal someplace before they take the old one down. And I think of Salt Lake City or Pittsburgh, who are actively right now starting their terminals. We, on the other hand, had to build on top of ourselves. We're an H-shaped terminal. We had concourses running east-west and then cross-tied them. But in order to actually replace and expand our entire terminal building, we evaluated, could we build another terminal? But we knew if we did that, it would have just been on the other side of our parking garages. We still would have had to come back and seismically upgrade the existing building. So we would have just been back in the same situation. It would have forced the passengers into some incredible walks. So what we ended up doing was a lot of prefabrication, gutting the old building, moved everybody out of the old building into the new office building we built at the parking garage, which included TSA, our port police, badging, and the fun part was the emergency operations center that had to move with it. Then gutted the existing building, but because of the structural limitations, we were building a new roof over the entire building, and we prefabricated that roof the other side of the airport. It's a 400,000 square foot roof, which then, in order to move it into place throughout the existing airfield and then over all of our baggage system, had to coordinate the work, splitting apart the roof into, I'll call it 20 manageable sections of maybe 2/3 of a football field, bringing that over at 55-foot elevation over the terminal build or over the airfield, and then sliding it into place over a couple of nights. And if you look at our webpage, you'll see some of the videos of that activity. It's really exciting to stand there in the alleyway between our terminals and watch something that big come across the building next to all the planes. So that's one of the things it's really that we had to get through from our constrained environment.
I think all I'll add to that is that I think you've heard from April and from George that the constraints aren't necessarily technical. They're based on the fact that your airport has to be open 24/7 practically, and you've got to minimize the impact on your passengers because those are your customers. You want to keep them as comfortable as you can the whole time. I've got an example a little bit further south, down at LAX a few years ago. We had to relocate dozens, probably 20 or 30 airlines from one set of gates to another set of gates to support a large renovation project. And what was originally planned or thought of by the airport as a 6-month process, we were able to plan and do in the course of 3 overnight moves. The media was actually prepared with the headlines, Airmageddon, but unfortunately you don't remember that headline because it didn't happen. The move came off pretty smoothly, and that was a positive story and one of my favorites to tell. So.
Awesome. Well, how about we start with Jay for this next question. How are airports in the Pacific Northwest incorporating sustainability initiatives and decarbonizing the airspace? And we'll start with Jay from the consultant perspective, working with different airports.
Well, I'll start by talking about Seattle in particular. Over the last few years, they've implemented a sustainability framework that for each project as it's going through design, at least the large ones, there's asking the design team to come to the commission with sustainable options for projects. And we all know that when you hear that phrase, you think dollar signs. And the port has realized that first cost is not always the correct answer to drive the decisions. And so they've asked for the design team to come back with full life cycle cost analysis, pricing by the contractor, schedule impact, and present those options to the commission. So the commission, who is mandated to follow the goals of the Port of Seattle, which are quite high from a sustainability standpoint, they can make the decisions and they don't get hung up in the facilities and maintenance folks where there is a natural tendency to go with the known and the things that have been done before. So that's one example of where we're seeing folks really take a bigger picture view and make sure that they're making a smart choice for the long run.
At PD, actually, the first thing we did from a sustainability and decarbonation perspective was build our existing building rather than tear it down and build a new one. So we really used a lot of the guts of the building from the emplaning level floor down is the same as it was before. But there were a lot of other factors that we looked at. And one of the kind of first things we did is we didn't establish a goal to be LEED certified, but we went with the team and said a series, I think it was 13 to 15 sustainability workshops to say what made the most sense. And then from that perspective, we then eventually figured out where we stood on a LEED perspective, and we're going for LEED Gold. But some of the things we did, we are doing a ground source system that enables us to put an open ground source system. We're able to pull water out of the aquifer, send it to a heat recovery system, and basically replace about 95% of our heating for the buildings. We'll be at 95% fossil fuel free at the completion of the project. We also did a lot of sustainability and reusing some of the componentry. So when we worked our way through the project and we knew we had to bifurcate the terminal building, we have a concourse connector that tied our two terminals, our two concourses together. So we adaptively reused that, put it on the outside of the concourses, enabled the passengers to get around the construction site, which is both safer for the passengers as well as a better experience for them and a much better and safer construction for the contractors.
I think I want to go work in Portland. Well, as an airline, we don't often run massive infrastructure projects, but on those big projects where we do partner with the Port of Seattle, we make sure that we are pursuing, in the case of North Satellite and the Seattle lobby, at least LEED Silver. For the North Satellite redevelopment, we also implemented a water reclamation system. So we captured the rainwater, of which there's plenty up here, and we use those in our restrooms. And of all of the components that were hauled out of that site over the years, more than 70% of that was actually recycled. For Alaska Airlines, the stuff that we can actually control to meet our sustainability goals is partnering with the Port of Seattle to do things like reduce our reliance on APUs, so working with our pilots and the Port of Seattle to actually have ground power units and preconditioned air available at all of our gates in which we operate. And then Joseph probably will know better about this than me, but we're also doing sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, so that can be incorporated into the existing infrastructure for blending with the jet fuels. And then Alaska is also investing extensively in eGSE, electric GSE. So any of the airport redevelopments, we really want to make sure that we either maintain or improve our access to electric charging areas.
And I'll throw in there related to SAF, the Port of Seattle's current study that will be published later this fall is looking at diverting waste from landfills in Washington and Oregon and funneling that waste to a renewable fuels production facility. With the different policy updates and legislation that the governor here has been able to pass in the past year, there are huge incentives for developers to come and make Washington State kind of the next big frontier for SAF production, which is exciting to see the industry act towards decarbonization of the airspace. We mention a lot of these examples. April, you've mentioned the passenger experience with the baggage tags and printing at the port. With respect to the community as well, interested in how these projects, how they benefit the community members, maybe around the airport, or maybe the native peoples of this area in the Pacific Northwest, and kind of, I guess, more so the strategic approach that, say, each one of you have or your organizations have when embarking on these types of projects with respect to that. George, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I'll go first. So one of the key things for us was making sure for the overall port perspective here was that the prosperity that we have achieved through the airport and the port gets shared with the community. So again, the key thing for us on TCOR is we have got about $250 to $260 million worth of contracts that were being let to emerging small businesses, minority or women-owned businesses. About 20 million of that is design, about 240 of that will be construction. And that's getting pretty close to the capacity, I think, of that the community can handle with some of the other public works that are going on. Some of the other things we've talked about is sustainable wood. If you look at any of the pictures of our new terminal building, it is a wood roof structure. We were able to harvest basically all of the logs that we used. It's about 3 million board feet of logs overall in constructing the roof from sustainably managed forest within 300 miles of PDX. And then we actually worked with the tribes, as well as some other landowners, the mills, that we can actually trace which is a totally different process done before, but we can trace the logs from the forest through the milling to actually where we've installed them in a number of places to terminals. So we can point out some of our skylights, for example, we know came from the Umpqua tribe, or some of the concessions building from the Grand Ronde and some of the other tribes. So we've been working with the tribes too to help just kind of bridge that gap that maybe hasn't been there in the past.
I'd probably have to say that my greatest contribution to the traveller experience was tearing out that disgusting 40-year-old carpet from North Satellite. But all jokes aside, if I think about transforming Painfield from a general aviation airport to that beautiful commercial airport that is servicing our North Sound guests, we're really opening up the connectivity for people in the North Sound to travel to Phoenix, to travel to Hawaii, to travel up to Alaska, and you're removing their requirement to get in their cars and get on the I-5 and drive all the way down to SeaTac. That airport is providing so much to the community. It's a beautiful airport. It keeps things simple, and it's removing the stress from having to travel.
I think the only thing I would add is that, as you know, Joseph, the SAF subject and the test that SeaTac is running, SEA, has identified that there are local air quality benefits to the use of SAF by airports. Yes, there are large carbon impacts that could be shared, and traded, and they may be, but there are very measurable local air quality issues, benefits to the use of SAF, and that's obviously a subject that every airport is sensitive to in their communities.
So I'll maybe taking a step back, looking forward, what do each of you see as the most significant, the grandest challenge that the aviation industry faces going forward? And how are we going to solve those challenges? I want answers.
Answers, okay. I'll start. I think really there's several things that are coming together in a confluence that is really kind of putting the squeeze on everything. One is aging facilities and infrastructure. The average airport and terminal is decades old, quite often has systems that are well beyond the end of life. So there's one. We've got a societal and climate driver to decarbonize and to electrify quite often the systems and facilities. Second one, we talked at the beginning about an increase in traffic, either back to pre-pandemic or beyond, certainly in the coming years. And I think the fourth one is sort of, the traveling passengers experience, their expectations around interaction with the facility, interaction through apps, through their phone, just the immediacy of data. And you put all four of those together and it forces things to change. And I think as George talked about, there's several, there's opportunities in those combinations of drivers to say, hey, if we make this move, it actually solves two problems. And I think looking for those opportunities where we can move in a direction that's informed by all of that context to make a smart choice that is efficient with dollars, that helps drive multiple aspects forward.
And I think Jake covered all the big things. So I'll just throw in one more out there for us in Portland. It's kind of unique, is that we've been told from the seismologists and geologists that we've got a 30% chance that there will be a 8 to 9 magnitude earthquake in the next 50 years. So we've got to make sure that we've got the terminal building, the runways prepared for that event when it happens, so we can assist in recovery of the region. So we're working on T-core to make sure the roof is fully resilient. We can actually know our roof, when we put it in, can move 24 inches any direction horizontally, up 6 inches and down 4 inches, and it's isolated from the rest of the building. So we know that we'll have a big portion of the building with the curtain wall hung from it that survives an earthquake. We are working on a resilient runway. We're just kicking off the design, got some bipartisan infrastructure funding for that to look at. We get a runway that is resilient and handles the next earthquake. And if you look at, I think it was Senda Airport in Japan, that a tsunami hit them at the Tohoku earthquake, yet their runway survived because they had stone columns that kept the runway up, so they were able to assist in the recovery of the region. That's kind of big for us, besides the normal things that Jay talked about.
I think now that you've talked about that earthquake, I don't want to move to Portland. Jay did cover all of it, but I think one of the things, because of the airline is so traveller focused, we're really needing to think about adapting our spaces to supporting our changing traveller demographics. So one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is, as our demographic actually gets older, there's a bigger demand for services such as wheelchairs. This summer we saw in our peak up to 150 requests per hour for guests to have wheelchairs. That's almost an hour's wait for people coming into the lobby and trying to transition out to their gate in a wheelchair. What I'm thinking about as I trash the lobby is really providing enough space or enough spaces to support that volume of guests who need that mobility service. We're also looking at changing our processes so that those guests who come in and need that wheelchair access, they're not having to get a bag tag here and drop their bag over there and see an agent over here. How can we change our processes so as they come in, they are welcomed into our lobby, into a comfortable environment, and their needs are all met in one place? The other challenge that we have is, with that volume of requirement, we have an issue with having enough staff who can actually transport these guests out to our gates. And staffing is a problem for all of us, not just in our lobby, not just in our wheelchair resources, but out on the ramp as well. So that's always going to be a challenge for us. So making sure that we have enough people to execute our level of service in the way that we want and need it for Alaska Airlines.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time, but I thank you to the passionate individuals on this stage. It clearly shows in the way that you talk about these projects and initiatives that you're working on. Thank you, everybody, for your time and listening this afternoon. Give them a big round of applause. Thanks.